My very special guest today is Dr. Wayne Dyer. Dr. Dyer began his career as an author in the early 1970s, traveling the country and selling his first book, Your Erroneous Zones, from the trunk of his car. That book went on to sell more than 30 million copies and became the best-selling book of the 1970s. Despite a childhood spent in orphanages and foster homes, he has overcome many obstacles to make his dreams come true. Today, he spends much of his time showing others how to do the same. As an internationally renowned author and speaker in the field of self-development, Dr. Dyer has written more than 30 books, 18 of which have been national bestsellers. Several of his books have been featured as PBS specials, raising over $150 million for national public television. So you say that if we change our thinking, we can change our lives. And I'd like to know when and where you learned this.
Oh boy, this goes way back. I grew up in a series of foster homes and orphanages when I was a little boy, and I learned right then and there. I used to call myself the richest kid in the orphanage, because most of the people in there, all of the kids that were in there, thought of themselves as poor. Right. That you can't have money because, and they would complain about things. I can remember in the home that we lived in Mount Clemens, Michigan, there was a lady brought her daughter there. Now I wasn't there because I had been abandoned or anything. I was there because my father had walked out on his family, and my mother had to place us in there. I reunited with my mother 10 years later, and I'm still united with her. She's almost 94 years old.
Really? And
I love her very dearly. Oh. But in those days, there was no welfare, and there was, nobody, to help other than the churches or people who just volunteered. So we were placed in a series of homes. But I remember whenever a new kid would come in, and they were usually there for the same reasons. My mother had no money. She was making $17 a week, working as a candy girl at Kresge's on the east side of Detroit. So, with 3 children, and my father had just walked out. He was an alcoholic and just a bad dude. So I can remember this lady bringing in a little girl. Her name was Martha. And I remember they would always say when there was a new kid, she was crying. She was upset because her mother held her there and she had to leave her there and so on. And I can remember saying to her, "This is a great place. You're going to love this place. There's no parents here. You're going to have a wonderful time here." And so I was always the one that someone would call and say, just see Wayne, because he always has a positive attitude. And my attitude always was, this is what we've got, this is what we have. And when I would look around and see all of the other people not having any money, I was the one who said, I found out that soda pop bottles were worth 2 cents. And for me, 2 cents, that was just amazing. So I would just follow people around who were drinking a soda pop. So you almost through with that? And I'll take it off your hands. And
so you always saw the opportunity.
And I always knew that it was just the way you think. I can remember our teacher that year, her name was Mrs. Poole, and I can remember her yelling at the class and saying, "This is the worst class that I've ever had. I can't, this class." And I remember being out on the playground, and the little kids all upset, and especially many of the girls were crying. We're in her worst class. And I just said, if this is her worst class, she's got an easy life. It was like, just change it. You don't have to believe what she says. Change the way you think, and you can decide to be happy right now.
And you were how old at this time?
I was 7, 6, 7 years old.
You knew that this...
Yeah.
Wow.
It's something that I've always known, that we become what we think about, and if you change the way you think about things, you change the world that you live in. Yeah.
So how can we use affirmations to get unstuck and become more positive? How do we use them?
Well, affirmations are, if you were to walk into my home over on Maui, and walk...
Oh, and I'd like to.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
And you walked and looked around at all the different... I have affirmations everywhere. I have them over my bed. I have them where I shave. I have one at my door that as I walk out, it says, "Attitude is everything, so pick a good one."
Yeah.
I have one on my in the car, right as I look at it every single day, right on the dashboard, and it says, "Practice aloha," so that somebody's honking
Yeah.
their horn or whatever it is, and it's like, I look at that every time I'm in the car, and it's a reminder to me, be kind,
Yeah.
don't be so frustrated.
Because
Don't be so
aloha is
frustrated.
kind of a welcoming, loving sort of.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
an all-consuming. I
Right.
knew that
It's
when
a
I
term,
went there.
yeah, did you live there in Hawaii?
No, I didn't
Oh,
live there, but
oh.
every time I visited, and I have friends that live there, and they always say aloha, and it's a
Yeah.
deeper meaning than just
Yeah,
hello.
it's a greeting, and
It's a
it's
greeting,
also
it's
a
a-
hello, it's a goodbye, but it really just means, practice being in the spirit, the
Being
spirit
present
of God.
and
Yeah,
being,
being here,
yeah.
being, allowing, and so you'll see them all over. You'll see them on the, on the cupboards, and
That's wonderful.
my kids.
Would you say there was one affirmation that we could all use to change, to move towards our dreams right now?
I don't know that there's one. I mean, the one that I use is that, I can attract anything I want into my life. I am in charge of my life. I can create health and happiness and being positive. I just remind myself of that over and over and over again until it just becomes a way of being. Because an affirmation is just sort of a beginning step. It's a way of allowing yourself to retrain your mind to create the habit that we have, that things aren't going to work out and things are terrible and I can't.
That's like old programming,
overcome. Yes,
correct?
it's all it is. It's just habitual thinking, one of the great poets, Wordsworth, said that habits rule the unreflecting herd. It's like you become part of the herd that doesn't reflect, and you want to change those habits. Yeah.
What would you say is the key to living an inspired life, since you seem to be living one?
I think probably the most important thing about being inspired is to understand what the word inspired means. If you break it down, it's in spirit. And it's like a recognition. I think the most significant thing about it is that you begin to realize that who I am is not a human being here having a spiritual experience, but it's really the reverse. That who I am is a spiritual being, an infinite spiritual, invisible being, having a temporary human experience. And the key to living an inspired life is to always come from that place. In Excuses Be Gone, in a recent book of mine, I talk about living from a place of awareness. And awareness is thinking like God thinks. Like we all come from a source, every single one of us, and we all return to that source. T.S. Eliot said, "We shall not cease from exploration, but at the end of all of our exploring will be to return to the place from which we originated and to know it for the first time." And he was speaking about death. It's like ultimately you're going to return to the place from which you originated. I take that to mean that if you return to the place from which you originated, you don't have to die to experience that.
Yeah.
You can live in spirit. And when you see yourself as a spiritual being, having a temporary human experience,
And everything is ongoing.
Everything
It's
shifts.
nothing.
Everything changes for you, and you begin to recognize that there's absolutely nothing that you can't do. I mean, in the New Testament, there's a wonderful line of Jesus. He says, with God, with Source, with Spirit, however you want to call it, all things are possible. And I always ask an audience, what does that leave out? That all things are possible literally means all things are possible. So whatever it is you'd like to attract into your life, whatever you'd like to accomplish, whatever you'd like to do in your life, if you start from a spiritual place, a place of all things are possible, if I return, and get to that place, and then I begin to visualize it, and I begin to use my imagination, because everything that we see around us, everything in this world, was once imagined. Everything. That camera that is there, the clothes that you're wearing, the chairs that we're sitting on, everything once had to be imagined. If you get that, I mean, Einstein's famous observation was that, imagination is more important than knowledge. If you can learn how important your imagination is, and that's where your spirit is, in that place, and then once you go to that place, in what it is you'd like to attract into your life, you're coming from a spiritual place, absolutely nothing is impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you define spirituality?
I think it's, again, Einstein was one of my heroes, and they asked him about quantum physics and all of these technical questions, and I remember him saying, he said, they're just details. He said, I'd like to really learn to think like God thinks. I think, I was down in Australia a couple of years ago, and I was on a show there, the Tonight Show down there in Australia, the equivalent of the Tonight Show here. And the woman asked me, what is your mission? And I just blurted out, to live a God-realized life. And she asked me what that meant. And I said, I think that means to learn to think like God thinks, like, how does the source of all things, if you could put it into a context of how does it think? How does God think? The only thing that God thinks, it seems to me, is like if these were the hands of God, you'd say, well, what does God do with his hands? Well, the only thing he does with his hands is that he gives. And spirituality is that. It's taking your attention off of yourself. Like the first 9 months that you were alive, you know, inside your mother's womb, there was absolutely nothing for you to do. You know, you just let go and you let God, which is what we say in the recovery movement. You just let go and you just allow. And you can't interfere with the process. There's nothing, you know, there's an invisible intelligence that is allowing this growing fetus to have its nose show up, its heart starts beating in 1 second, and after 9 months it comes out and we look at this beautiful little creature and we say, great work, God, we'll take over from here. And in the taking over process, we create what we call a false self. Yeah. And the false self is the ego.
That's when separation occurs, right?
Absolutely.
That's when we separate from source.
Right.
Right.
And then with that separation, we call it edging God out, E-G-O, the ego. That's the ego. And we take on this false self, and we start to believe that who I am is not this divine perfection from which I originated, but who I am is what I do, and what I have, and what I accomplish, and what other people think of me, and who I am is separate from everybody else, and even most egregiously, who I am is separate from God. Yeah. We begin to believe all these things, and that's the opposite of, you asked me about spirituality. It's to go back to the place from which you originated and to live from that, which means it's about serving. Yeah. It's about offering. Lao Tzu spoke about this in the Tao Te Ching. He said your original nature is based on 4 cardinal virtues. And the cardinal virtues, if you can live them, this is who you are as a being. Reverence for all of life, just finding love in all things, the planet, the plants, the human beings, the animals, everything. Have reverence for all of it. You kill nothing. You know, a natural kind of sincerity, which means a sense of honesty about not just not stealing, but about who you are as a human being. And a sense of kindness, you know, just being kind to each other and to everyone and everything. And also service. Those are the 4 cardinal virtues. Reverence for all of life, honesty, kindness, service. That's a spiritual life. And that's what a God-realized life is. It's how I try to live my life.
That's wonderful.
Getting rid of this ego.
Yeah.
It's a tough master.
It's a tough one.
It's a very tough master. I mean, the ultimate, even in relationships, Mariel, I mean, one of the hardest things we have to do in relationships is to try to love like God loves. You know, I quote in the film, I quote Hafiz, the great Persian poet. He said, even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, you owe me. He said, just think what a love like that can do. It lights up the whole world.
Without any expectation.
That's spirituality. Yeah. It's like just, you know, living your life from a place of giving and offering
without any
and
expectation,
serving. And in our relationships, particularly our love relationships with each other, you know, to be able to love someone who doesn't love you back, you know, to be able to love someone who abandons you, someone who walks out on you, to be able to love a person who criticizes you or who just doesn't want anything to do with you, but that you love. You know, that's the ultimate test, and it's one of the tests that, you know, the ultimate love. I don't know if you have any children or not, but
I do.
You know, so the ultimate love is generally a mother's love for her child. Yeah. Because that's the God kind of love.
That is.
You don't look at that child who's crying and screaming in the middle of the night and say, you know, what do you think you're doing, and you're bothering me and all of that. You just offer them. You just you take that child, you put her to your breast, you feed them, you hold them, you comfort them, and if they cry 24 straight hours, you still do that. Yeah. It's like, and they don't have to love you back. They don't have to do anything. Try to take that kind of love and apply it in our relationships. That's when we push the ego out, because the ego always wants to own something. It always thinks that, I'll tell you.
It always wants to be right.
Right. It wants to be right, and it wants to own things. I'll tell you a great story. My friend David Simon told me this story. You know who Deepak Chopra is, I'm sure, a dear friend of mine. And his son Gotham was in New Delhi. And he went into and he was given an example of this at the Chopra Center, when I was sitting in on the audience. And Gotham went into the movie theater in Delhi put his hat on a chair, and went in to get some popcorn. He went, got his popcorn, came back, and somebody was sitting in his chair. And he said to the gentleman who was sitting in his chair, he said, "Excuse me, but that's my chair." And the gentleman said to him, he said, "Well, how do you know it's your chair?" He said, "Well, I put my hat on it." He said, "That's how I know it's my chair." And the man said, "So according to your logic and way of thinking, if I put my hat on your car, it's mine?" And I thought, that's what the ego does, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's what the ego wants to own everything, including each other. You know,
Yeah.
it's like if I'm in a relationship with you and I love you, that means, you know, we place conditions on it.
Yeah.
You're responsible. And if you decide to love someone else, then I can't love you anymore. Or if you walk out on me, or if you criticize me, or if you leave me, being able to love someone, even if they do that, you know. Anthony DeMello used to talk about that in like loving without attachment. You know, the ego is such a hard master. It just it has all of these demands. And I mean, he used to say that the great test to be able to love someone is to say, "I leave you free to be yourself, to think your thoughts, to indulge your tastes, to do exactly as you please, and I will still love you." Wow. Hardly anyone can pass that test, but God can.
Would you say you've overcome your ego?
No,
Me
I wouldn't. I wouldn't say that at all. If I said yes, I would be lying. I think
it's a journey every day. You do better. You know,
it's the taming of it.
Yeah.
It's really the taming of it. It isn't nearly.
It's a balance.
Yeah, I think that true nobility really isn't about being better than anyone else.
No.
It's about being better than you used to be.
Right.
And you know, I mean, I've been through divorce twice. I've been through addictions. I've been through a lot of heartaches, a lot of struggles in my life, living in orphanages and foster homes and so on. All of those things have been just, you know, great teachers for me. But the toughest one for me is still the ability to love those who don't respond to me the way I think that they should respond to me. Not so much in an audience, and not so much with the people that I run into.
No, but you're into, you're close to people. No, I know, it's very difficult.
Even with my own children, and I have 8 beautiful, wonderful children.
But that's what awareness is. That's what being present is about. It's about staying, and it's like, okay, I'm not perfect, but I can try in this moment to accept that I don't get things the way that I want them.
And to recognize that it's your ego talking.
Yeah, because it's not you. It's not really your pure you
it's
when you're talking about the child. Yeah.
And there was a great teacher from India. His name was Vivekananda.
Yeah, I know.
Do you know who he was?
I know his work, yeah.
And he came over, he came in early part of the last century, 1905, 1910. He traveled all over, you know, brilliant speaker. When you hear his stuff, I mean, his devotees used to ask him, "How do we do this? How do we tame this ego? How do we, you know, do we push it out? Do we destroy it?" And his answer was so beautiful. He said, "In the springtime, go out and observe the blossoms on the fruit trees." He said, "The blossoms vanish of themselves as the fruit grows. So too will the lower self, the ego, the false self, so too will the lower self vanish as the divine grows within you." And that's what it is for me. I'm 69 years old, and it's like every day I try to let the divine grow within me just a little more. Just, you know, practicing aloha, whatever you want to call it. I was staying in a hotel in Los Angeles the other day. I was up taping this with the Bonnie Hunt show, and I was on the 5th floor, and there was a woman who comes into the room. She's been on the 5th floor for 12 years. She's a maid, and she cleans our toilets, and she keeps our living room nice, and she's she cleans up dirty sheets that have stains on them. I mean, this is an angel who comes into your house. And I was there with my daughter Serena. We had just done the show, and I started talking to her, and I just reached into my pocket and I took a $100 bill and I put it in her hand. My God, you would have thought that I had given her the keys to the kingdom of God. I mean, she was so great, and we were there for 2 more days. She left gifts in my daughter's room and in my room, and she brought me a picture of her daughter, and she's from El Salvador, and she had just lost somebody in some flooding that had just taken place there, and it was like
opened something up.
That's letting the divine grow within you, finding, and it isn't the $100. I mean, a lot of you watching can't afford $100, but you can afford. You can think a nice thought. It's just like somebody.
You can say a kind word. You can say, and so many people forget to say thank you to people that serve
Or the
in that
people
way,
that are
or-
begging at the, you know, with their brown signs up on the side of the road. You don't have to give everybody who's standing there asking you for money, but you also don't have to criticize them. You don't have to find fault with them. And you don't know what the story is.
Yeah, we
and
all
you
think
can,
we know.
Yeah, you can give a silent
yeah.
blessing. I can remember, I used to do that. I used to think, I remember one time thinking, who is this guy? He's healthy, he's strong. What is he doing standing up there?
Right,
I
right,
work,
right.
why isn't he working? And then when I got up a little closer, I saw that he only had one leg. And I
Yeah.
thought, he only has one leg.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I pulled the car over and I got him in and I took him, I got him something to eat and gave him a little money and all that. But there was a time, he's like, not that instant judgment. That's it's like letting, that's what Vivekananda meant. Let the divine grow within you, and it's like you're a vessel, you're a container. And the more divinity that you allow into you, the more of those 4 cardinal virtues that I spoke about that you begin to practice, it pushes out the rest of the stuff, because there's no room in there for the ego and for all the false self, and look at me, and look how wonderful I am, and look at all my stuff, look at all my accomplishments, look how wonderful I am, and look how angry I am.
So if you practice those virtues, and
it pushes it out, and you
become
become Christ-like, you become Buddha-like, you begin to live a life of a higher spiritual consciousness. You know, you live at city consciousness, where you're constantly giving and offering and serving. And the irony of all of this is that when you begin to do this and do it more and more and more in your life, the stuff that you used to chase after and you used to try to get into,
means nothing to you anymore.
but more of it comes into your life. It just keeps showing up.
But you don't
more.
care.
Yeah, and then you just circulate. Then you just give it away.
You just give it away.
Yeah. So
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who didn't consider themselves spiritual?
I would say that you know, try to wiggle your finger. You know, just take your finger and ask yourself, how do I wiggle this finger? And then you do this, and you say, wow, what is that? And you say, well, I can go inside your brain, and I can find the command center inside of your brain if I look in there, and they can do that, and that allows you to do this. But no one can find the commander in the command center that says, I think I'm going to wiggle my finger.
Right.
And that's your spirit. That's your thought. That's invisible. That's an invisible message to your finger to say, wiggle for me.
Right.
You can't find the connection. No one can find it. There's nothing there. It's like, what is this stuff? You can look inside of you. Right. That invisibleness that allows you to do those kinds of things is that's your spirit. That's the invisible part of you, and that's what organizes everything in your life.
Yeah. The inner you.
Yeah.
So in your film, The Shift, you explore the journey of making the shift from being motivated by ambition to seeking an abundant life of meaning and purpose. So what is the best way to begin this process?
I think we've been talking about it all along here. I think the best way to begin it is to recognize who you truly are, your true essence. I'm writing a companion book to this movie, it's called The Shift, but it's called there's 4 chapters. From is the first chapter, ambition is the second, to is the third, and ambition is the fourth. And so it's the journey that all of us take, Mario. It's the journey from, where did we come from? And you begin to look at, you know, not my parents and all of that, but from a quantum perspective, from a spiritual perspective, that the particles, quantum physics teaches us that particles do not come from particles. That it's Jesus said it, it's the spirit that gives life. Find your spirit.
It's that quantum leap.
Yeah, and then ambition becomes the part of our life when we take on all of these things. I am what I have, and I have to accomplish more. And then 2 is when you begin to see, if you start here, and you start heading this way, away from your original source, away from your source, then you have to someday make a U-turn, which I've had to do. And as you make a U-turn, you start coming home. But you don't have to die. You come back to your spirit. And then meaning is when you're living here. And I think that if everything that's in that invisible drop of human protoplasm, that tiny little speck of human protoplasm that began you, you know, where you can see a trillion of them on the head of a pin, but everything you needed for this journey that you have, the color of your eyes, the aging process, all the things that are happening to us, if everything that we needed for the physical journey is in that speck, then so was everything that we needed for the rest of the journey as well. That's right. Relax, let go, lighten up, practice non-interference, see God in nature, find your true self in in the joy of the miraculousness. I mean, Rumi said, sell your cleverness
Yes.
and purchase bewilderment.
Yeah.
Get into a state
Yeah.
of just awe and bewilderment
Well, that's
about
like,
everything.
that's childlike. That's childlike.
Exactly.
And that connection to nature, that's my
Yeah, that's
that's
where
my
God.
thing.
That's what Lao Tzu taught. That's what
Yes.
Lao Tzu taught in the
Yes.
Tao Te Ching. That God is really in nature.
In nature.
It's not some
Yeah.
religious thing that because the God that most people think about is a God of the ego.
Yeah.
It's
And
just
it's
a
all
God.
separation.
yeah,
It's all, been
and it's a
bad,
God of
yeah.
revenge. It's a
Yeah.
God that gets even. It's a
Yeah.
God that knows how to heal you, but withholds
Yeah.
it from you.
But only if.
Yeah, only if, and if you pay and buy indulgences.
Yeah.
This is just a God that we've all created out of our
Yeah.
own egos.
Yeah.
The God that I'm speaking about
Yeah.
is that which allows everything to be,
Yeah.
that just does nothing but offer and asks nothing in
Yeah.
return.
Well, it's like
It
you were
says-
talking about the blossom, which is such a
Yeah,
beautiful,
right.
beautiful image. When did you first fall in love with movies?
On the east side of Detroit, at the Vogue Theater
Yeah.
on Cadju and Harper. There was a little club in there that you could go there for 12 cents on Saturday afternoon and see 2 movies and cartoons and be a member of the, I don't know if you remember this, but the Roy Rogers Writers Club. And I was a member of the Roy Rogers Writers Club, and I used to go in there and I had a friend. I say little. I mean, he was much smaller than me. In the 8th grade, his name was Joe Fiore, and he used to take me down to the Fox Theater in downtown Detroit, and we would, he got so excited about movies and watching them and so on. Yeah, and I started watching them on our little Admiral television, our little black and white television set, when I was just a young boy. I love movies.
That's
yeah.
great. What does spiritual film mean to you? And what are your most favorite films about transformation?
Well,
Aside from your own.
Yeah, yes. I love, one of my very favorite movies was just recently a spiritual cinema monthly selection,
Yeah,
whatever
right.
it was. It was called Deja Vu.
Yes.
With Vanessa Redgrave.
Yeah.
That film just blew me away.
Yeah.
I mean, any film that has chase scenes in it or has violence in it or guns in it and so on, I don't really.
You turn off.
I
Yeah.
don't even go to them. But like that film got me really thinking about the possibilities. If any of you haven't, if
Well,
you
I think
haven't
that's
seen
the
that
wonderment of a great film like that, is that you begin to think, oh, there's this possibility, which
yeah, that all things are possible,
Yeah.
and you can make anything happen.
Do you
like
think that films can be used for social change?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
See, one of the reasons I did this film, The Shift,
Yeah.
was because I've heard that 10% of the people in our country buy almost 100% of the books, something like 97, 98% of the books, which means that approximately 85 to 90% of the people never buy a book. And I've written lots and lots of books. But those same 90 right,
I know.
those same 90% of the people, they go to the
by film.
movies.
They do.
They go to the movies. So I thought,
Well,
a
I
film.
remember, because it was brilliantly done, because I remember seeing the promotion on the internet for months, or maybe
Right.
a year prior to it coming out, and it was very intriguing, and it
well,
really,
there's just great people in it. Michael
Yeah.
Bourgeon is a
Yeah,
great
it's
director, and
great.
Portia de Rossi. I mean,
Yeah.
and Michael DeLuise, Dom DeLuise's son.
Yeah.
All of the people in this film are. When I was asked to do the film, I did the film at the age of 68, which meant taking on a whole new career. Because I don't take direction well, and I speak like I'm speaking now in front of
Right.
an audience. I don't
Yes.
use notes.
Right.
But when you
Comes
do a
from your
film,
heart.
as you know, having
Yeah.
been in films, you do the same thing over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And I just decided that this was something that I could do. One of the excuses I didn't want to use is I'm too old to learn this, or you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can teach an old dog anything,
Yes.
And so.
I'm sure you were still spontaneous, or anyway.
Well, I
so-
insisted that it be professionally done, and I didn't
Yeah.
want, because I've seen a lot of the movies that are called spiritual movies, but the
I agree with you.
quality is just not there, and there's people trying to be actors and they're not, and so on. I wanted it to be a polished, professional film.
Good for you.
And my
That's
goal was to
powerful.
have 10 million people watch it, and I know that will happen. And
Oh,
once
it'll happen.
once you see 10 million in America is pi. Do you remember pi when you were
Yeah.
in geometry?
Yeah, yeah.
3.1416. If you can get 3.1416% of a population to align, all the
Then
rest.
all the rest fall into place,
It's the
right?
100th
That's
monkey.
right.
They
That's
all
right.
begin to align.
That's right.
So for me, if 10 million people watch The Shift, we can make a shift not only in our country, but on our planet as well. And that's why I'm happy to have the film as part of spiritual cinema, because it's another whole bunch
great.
of thousands of people who
Well,
watch it,
you've
tell other people to
inspired
watch
the whole
it.
spiritual cinema circle, fan base. They're totally turned on by the film, so that's wonderful.
That's great.
What films do you think have made a positive impact on society?
Well, I remember, what was who was the guy that ran all the way across the country? What was
Forrest Gump?
Forrest Gump.
Right.
Forrest Gump was
Right,
one of those
sure,
kind of films
sure.
that made people look at people who we call special needs and see the beauty and see the joy in them. I think the film about what Tom Hanks was in about the D-Day, Saving Private Ryan.
Yes.
I think that film transformed my brother's life. My brother Dave was in Vietnam, was a Bronze Star winner, and saw such horrible, horrible violence. He was a medic there, and he saw hundreds and hundreds of people, and he had never talked about it for 30, 40 years. Never talked about it. He was just so bogged up inside, you couldn't get a word out of him.
Yeah.
He now has Parkinson's disease, and
so many of those people of that generation weren't allowed to really speak about,
and he said, "That's what it's like, Wayne.
Yeah.
That's what it's like." I think the film Ghost was one of those films that really, deeply and profoundly touched me in terms of looking at
when it opened
guidance
that window.
from the other side, guidance from the other side,
Yeah.
those kinds of things, and
Yeah.
lots more
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
So what kind of films do you think young people should see, and why?
Well, I think young people should see films that. I don't like to use the word should, but I yeah.
I don't either.
Yeah, but I think young people can benefit greatly by films that give them sort of an expanded view of what is possible in the world, instead of so much of what we think young people want to see, which is a lot of silliness and a lot of violence, and a lot of obscenity and so on.
And also empty, these empty films. It's like there's so much big something happening, but there's not, you look under the surface and there's nothing going on.
I get letters from people who've seen The Shift, and they said they've just had it on in their home, and their teenagers will come in and they'll say, "What are you watching?" And all this is on, and then before you know it, they're hooked. Yeah, they're hooked, and they're watching it. They're telling other people about it as well.
Nice.
So I think if it can just expand your consciousness and I think film can make a huge difference in transforming the world. I really do. Yeah.
Well, you've kind of answered this question, and you've sort of made this film, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If time, money, or talent were an obstacle, what kind of movie would you like to make? If you got to do it again, and you had everything at your disposal. Now, having made a film, you know the opportunity that is.
There were no obstacles. The money wasn't an obstacle, and time wasn't, and everything
thought
else.
that you were gonna say
We just did what we wanted to do.
That's wonderful.
And I think this film, and maybe perhaps a follow-up to it, maybe following the characters or something, is. I would just like to make a film that can make the shift, because we've got to make the shift.
Well, this has been just delightful. I could speak to you forever, but I think we've run out of time. Thank you so much.
I was such an admirer of your grandfather.
Oh,
by the
thank
way.
you.
Such an admirer.
Why I say thank you? Because I'm responsible.
Yeah. Well, I remember reading Islands in the Stream.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, one of the lines that he had in there, a man had just been. He just found out that his son had been killed in the war in Spain, and he that night was out dancing. And someone said to him, "How can you be dancing when you've just found out that news?" And I've never forgotten this. He said, "I decided that sooner or later I would have to get over this, or it would kill me." And he said, "I just picked sooner." And I learned that from your grandfather. Yeah, pick sooner.
Pick sooner.
Yeah, pick sooner. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome.
God bless you.
Yeah, you too.